I was reviewing my investment portfolio when my daughter called to casually inform me she'd sold 35 years of family memories to fund her lifestyle. "We're going tomorrow, Dad. I've sold your beach house," Jessica announced with the casual tone of someone discussing weekend plans. But I took a deep breath and smiled because there was something my dear daughter didn't know. That sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is teach their child the value of what they've carelessly thrown away. My name is George Hartwell. I'm 72 years old. And until that moment, I thought my daughter understood the difference between a transaction and a betrayal. The phone rang at 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday, just as I was settling into my evening routine with a cup of chamomile tea and the crossword puzzle. Martha used to say that routine was the backbone of a good life, and even 2 years after her passing, I maintained the rhythms we'd built together over 43 years of marriage. The newspaper spread across my lap, reading glasses perched on my nose, the familiar weight of our old ceramic mug in my hands. These small rituals kept me anchored in a world that felt increasingly foreign without her steady presence beside me. "Dad," Jessica's voice carried that familiar tone through the receiver, the one she'd used since college when she wanted something or was about to deliver news I wouldn't like. It was a carefully modulated sweetness, like artificial honey, designed to soften whatever blow was coming. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, setting down my pen and marking my place in the crossword. 7 across. Betrayal by family member. I should have recognized the omen. "How are the kids?" "They're fine, Dad. Tyler's excited about starting college in the fall, and Emma's doing well with her orthodontist appointments." She paused, and in that silence, I felt the first stirring of unease. The same sensation I'd learned to recognize during my 40 years in corporate management when an employee was about to deliver bad news they'd been rehearsing. "Dad, I need to tell you something. We've made a decision about the beach house." My grip tightened involuntarily on the phone. The Outer Banks cottage had been in our family for 35 years, purchased in 1989 when Jessica was just 10 years old. Martha and I had scrimped and saved to buy that little slice of paradise, working extra shifts at the plant and skipping vacations to make the down payment. I could still remember the day we'd closed on it. Martha crying happy tears as we stood on the weathered deck, Jessica building her first sandcastle in the dunes while the Atlantic stretched endlessly before us. We'd raised our daughter there during countless summers, teaching her to swim in those gentle waves, building sandcastles that would wash away with the tide, collecting shells and shark teeth along the shoreline during evening walks when the tourists had retreated to their air-conditioned rentals. What kind of decision? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was already racing with the particular dread that comes when you sense your world is about to shift fundamentally and irrevocably. "We're going tomorrow, Dad. I've sold your beach house." The words hit me like a physical blow, as if someone had struck me in the chest with a hammer. I set my teacup down with trembling hands, watching the amber liquid slosh against the porcelain rim, the same delicate china pattern Martha had chosen for our wedding registry 45 years ago. "You've what?" "I've sold it," Jessica repeated, her voice gaining confidence now that the initial revelation was out. "The closing is tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Mark found a buyer through his real estate connections. We got a really good price, actually. Way above market value. You should be pleased." "Jessica." I had to pause, gathering myself like a man preparing to defuse a bomb, knowing that one wrong word might detonate everything we'd built together. "That house isn't yours to sell." "Dad, come on. You put it in the family trust last year, remember? After Mom died, you said you wanted everything simplified for estate planning purposes. I'm the trustee now. We talked about this." Her tone carried a hint of impatience, as if I were a confused old man who'd forgotten our previous conversations. "The trust." Yes, I remembered with crystalline clarity. My lawyer, Harold Whitman, had suggested it as a tax strategy during one of our post-funeral meetings when I was still navigating the bewildering maze of paperwork that follows death. "It'll protect the assets and give Jessica experience managing family affairs," Harold had explained. "She's a smart woman, George. This will be good preparation for when she eventually inherits everything." I'd named Jessica as trustee, thinking it would give her valuable experience and demonstrate my confidence in her judgment. I trusted her completely, the way you trust your own child to honor the things you hold sacred. "The trustee position doesn't give you the right to sell family property without consulting me," I said, My voice harder now, steel creeping into words that had started soft. That position carries fiduciary responsibility, Jessica. It means you're supposed to act in the best interests of the beneficiaries, which includes me, as the grantor who's still very much alive. Dad, be realistic. You're 72 years old. When was the last time you even went to the beach house? It's just sitting there empty 11 months out of the year, costing money for maintenance, property taxes, insurance, utilities we barely use. This is smart financial planning, the kind of practical decision Mom would have supported. Smart financial planning. The phrase stung like salt in an open wound. As if I hadn't managed our finances successfully for 5 decades, building our modest wealth through careful budgeting, strategic investments, and the kind of old-fashioned frugality that young people like Jessica had never bothered to learn. As if I hadn't built a comfortable retirement through decades of working double shifts, brown bag lunches, and choosing practicality over luxury at every turn. As if I were some doddering old fool who couldn't balance a checkbook or understand the basics of asset management. How much did you sell it for? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. $450,000. That's almost double what you and Mom paid for it back in the 80s. You should be proud. It's been a fantastic investment. I closed my eyes and felt something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. She had no idea. None at all. Jessica, that property is worth at least $700,000 in today's market. Beachfront lots in that area have been selling for premium prices since the pandemic. Comparable properties have been going for. Dad, please. Her voice carried a note of condescension that I'd never heard before, as if she were speaking to a child who didn't understand adult concepts. Mark knows real estate. He's been doing this for 15 years, and he has connections throughout the coastal market. We got a fair price, and honestly, we need the money right now. Tyler's starting college next year, and the tuition alone is going to cost us $40,000 annually. Emma's dental work is going to cost a fortune. You've seen how crooked her teeth are. This solves our immediate problems and sets the kids up for their futures. Isn't that what you'd want? Our problems had become my problems, apparently. And the solution, in my daughter's mind, was to sell my memories, my refuge, the place where Martha and I had planned to spend our golden years watching grandchildren build the same sandcastles their mother had built decades earlier. Where is the money from the sale going? I asked, though I already suspected the answer based on the casual way she'd mentioned their financial needs. Into the family trust account, of course. Don't worry, Dad. It's all legal and above board. Harold helped us with the paperwork, so everything's been handled properly. The money will be there for all of us when we need it. Harold, my own lawyer, whom I'd trusted for 20 years to handle everything from our wills to our house purchase to Martha's estate after her death. Either he was incompetent, which seemed unlikely given his decades of successful practice, or Jessica had misrepresented the situation to him, perhaps suggesting I'd given my consent when no such conversation had ever occurred. Jessica, I want you to stop this sale immediately. Dad, I can't do that. The contracts are already signed, the deposit has been accepted, and we're closing tomorrow afternoon. Besides, we've already spent some of the money. Her voice took on a defensive quality, the tone of someone who knows they're in the wrong, but is committed to justifying their actions. We had to put a deposit down on Tyler's dormitory to secure his housing, and we used part of it to catch up on our mortgage payments. Mark's business has been struggling since the economy shifted, and this gives us the breathing room we need to get back on solid ground. So they'd already spent my money from the sale of property that held 35 years of memories, sold without my knowledge or consent, used to solve financial problems created by their own poor planning and overspending. I see, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. You'll thank me later, Dad. I know this seems sudden, but it really is the responsible thing to do. You don't need that big house anymore. It's not like you're going to be climbing up and down those stairs to the beach much longer. And we can use the money to help the grandchildren get started in life. Isn't that what you and Mom would have wanted? To see Tyler and Emma have opportunities you never had. What I wanted was to hang up the phone and pretend this conversation had never happened. What I wanted was to drive to the beach house right now, sit on the deck where Martha and I had watched countless sunsets, and feel her presence one more time before it was gone forever. What I wanted was for my daughter to understand that some things, memories, family history, the physical places where love lives, cannot be reduced to numbers on a balance sheet. Instead, I said. I understand, Jessica. You've made your decision. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Dad. I was worried you'd be upset, but I should have known you'd see the practical side. You and Mom always taught me to be smart about money. Reasonable. Yes, I would be reasonable. I would be very reasonable indeed. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, staring out the window at the street where Martha and I had raised our daughter, where we'd pushed her on her bicycle with its pink streamers and training wheels, where we'd waved goodbye as she left for college, full of dreams and promises to visit often and call every Sunday. The visits had become less frequent over the years, especially after she married Mark. Phone calls grew shorter, excuses more elaborate. Holidays became negotiations rather than celebrations. And now this. What would Martha say about this? The thought came unbidden, and with it, a flood of memories I wasn't prepared for. Jessica at 5, carefully watering Martha's tomato plants with her tiny plastic watering can, her face serious with concentration as she tried to copy her mother's gentle technique. Jessica at 12, crying in my arms after her first heartbreak when Tommy Henderson had chosen Melissa Parks for the school dance, trusting me to make everything better with ice cream and terrible jokes. Jessica at 18, hugging us both goodbye before leaving for college, promising to call every Sunday and meaning it with the fierce sincerity only teenagers possess. Where had that girl gone? When had she stopped trusting me to know what was best? When had I become just another obstacle to overcome rather than a father to consult? Just another voice to be managed rather than wisdom to be sought? My hands were trembling, not from age, but from a rage so pure and deep it frightened me. In 43 years of marriage, Martha had seen me truly angry only twice. Once when a drunk driver had nearly hit Jessica's school bus, and once when her college boyfriend had raised his voice to her during a family dinner, his face red with wine and entitlement. Both times, Martha had placed her soft hand on my arm and said quietly, "Steady, George. Steady." But Martha wasn't here now to steady me. And the person threatening my daughter's well-being, threatening the values and principles we'd tried so hard to instill, was my daughter herself. I picked up the phone and dialed Harold Whitman's home number, my fingers moving automatically through the familiar sequence I'd memorized over 20 years of friendship and professional relationship. He answered on the third ring, his voice slightly hoarse with the remnants of what sounded like a dinner conversation. "George, this is unexpected. Everything all right? Harold, I need to ask you about the beach house sale." There was a pause, the kind of silence that speaks volumes. In the background, I could hear the clink of silverware and the distant murmur of what must have been his wife, Sarah, clearing dishes. "What beach house sale, George?" "Jessica says she's closing tomorrow on the Outer Banks property. She says you helped with the paperwork, that everything's legal and above board." The pause stretched longer this time, and when Harold spoke again, his voice carried the careful precision of a lawyer who had just realized he was dealing with a potential crisis. "George, I have no knowledge of any sale involving your beach property. The last time I spoke with Jessica was approximately 6 months ago, when she called asking some general questions about trust administration, hypothetical scenarios," she said. "But there was never any mention of selling real estate, and there was certainly no paperwork prepared by this office." My suspicions confirmed with the cold finality of a judge's gavel. "Harold, I need to see you first thing in the morning. And I need you to pull all the documentation on the family trust, every page, every amendment, every piece of correspondence." "Of course, George. But before we hang up, I need to ask, do you have any reason to believe Jessica has forged your signature on any documents?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Did I believe my own daughter capable of forgery? 6 hours ago, I would have laughed at the suggestion. Now, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. "I don't know, Harold. But I intend to find out." "George, is everything all right? You sound—" "No, Harold. Everything is not all right." I spent that night in my study, going through files I hadn't touched in months, spreading documents across the mahogany desk Martha had given me for our 20th anniversary. Bank statements dating back 5 years, investment records showing the steady growth of our retirement accounts, property deeds for assets Jessica didn't even know existed. As I worked through the papers, a picture began to emerge that both clarified my situation and deepened my concern. Jessica didn't know about most of our wealth, I realized with growing unease. She had access to the family trust account, which contained about $50,000 earmarked for estate expenses and property maintenance. But the bulk of my assets, the investment accounts worth over $2 million, the rental properties in 3 different states, the life insurance proceeds from Martha's death that I'd carefully reinvested, were all in my name alone, protected by the kind of financial privacy that comes from a lifetime of careful planning. Jessica thought she was selling my only significant asset. She had no idea that the beach house, while sentimentally precious beyond measure, represented less than 5% of my total net worth. Is this what parenting becomes in the end? I found myself wondering as I sorted through documents that told the story of a lifetime's careful accumulation. Teaching lessons through consequences rather than conversation? The thought made my chest tight with a mixture of sadness and something approaching despair. I'd always imagined that wisdom would transfer naturally from parent to child, the way Martha's recipes had passed to Jessica through countless afternoons spent cooking together, the way my father's work ethic had shaped my own character through observation and example. But Jessica had stopped listening years ago. Somewhere in her 30s, my advice had become suggestions to be politely ignored. My concerns had become Dad being dramatic. My experience had become irrelevant to her modern problems, dismissed as the outdated thinking of a man who didn't understand the complexities of contemporary life. Maybe this is my fault, the treacherous thought whispered in the depths of my mind. Maybe I made it too easy for her. Maybe I should have let her struggle more when she was younger, forced her to earn what she received instead of providing so generously that she never learned the connection between effort and reward. I remembered the lawn-mowing battles of her teenage years with painful clarity. She'd complained so bitterly about having to earn her spending money that Martha had suggested we just give her an allowance instead. It's not worth the fight, Martha had said with the weary tone of a mother tired of negotiating every chore. But I'd held firm, insisting that Jessica understand the fundamental truth that money comes from work, not from wanting. She needs to understand that nothing valuable is free, I told Martha then. She needs to learn that respect is earned, not given. Now, looking at the evidence of Jessica's financial irresponsibility spread across my desk, credit card statements showing thousands in luxury purchases, mortgage records revealing they'd refinanced twice to extract equity for vacations and home improvements, I wondered if I should have been even firmer. Should have insisted on more chores, more consequences, more direct connection between effort and reward. But it was too late for such regrets. The question now was what to do with the knowledge I'd gained and the betrayal I'd discovered. By dawn, I had a plan forming in my mind like the slow development of a photograph in solution. But I also had something else, a gnawing uncertainty that would plague me for months to come. Was I about to save my daughter from her own destructive impulses, or was I about to destroy our relationship forever in the name of teaching her a lesson she might be too proud to learn? The morning light filtered through my study windows, illuminating the scattered papers that represented both my life's work and my daughter's betrayal. In a few hours, I would meet with Harold to confirm what I already suspected. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly what I was prepared to risk in order to save the daughter I'd raised to be better than this. The next morning, I was waiting outside Harold's office when he arrived at 7:45, 45 minutes before his official business hours began. He took one look at my face and unlocked the door without comment, understanding with the intuition that comes from decades of dealing with family crises that this couldn't wait for normal business hours. Harold's office hadn't changed in 20 years, the same dark wood paneling, the same leather-bound law books arranged with meticulous precision, the same photographs of his own family arranged on his desk, like sentinels protecting against the chaos of other people's legal troubles. It was a room designed to project stability and wisdom, the kind of place where serious decisions were made with careful deliberation rather than emotional impulse. "Coffee?" Harold asked, moving toward the small machine in the corner of his office with the automatic gestures of a man following a familiar routine. "Please," I said, settling into one of the client chairs that had held me through countless important moments over the past 2 decades, signing our wills after Jessica was born, updating them when Martha was diagnosed with cancer, revising everything after her death when the future suddenly required new definitions and different priorities. Harold handed me a steaming mug and took his place behind the massive oak desk that had belonged to his father, Another lawyer who'd spent his career helping families navigate the treacherous waters between love and money, loyalty and self-interest. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone trained to hear the worst of human nature without judgment. I walked him through Jessica's phone call, her casual announcement of the sale, her claim that he'd helped with the paperwork. As I spoke, Harold's expression shifted from concern to confusion to something approaching alarm. "George," he said when I finished, "I need to be absolutely clear about this. I have prepared no documents authorizing the sale of your beach property. I have not spoken with Jessica about real estate transactions. I have not reviewed any contracts or closing documents related to that property." He pulled out a thick file labeled with my name and began flipping through pages with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained to find crucial details hidden in legal minutiae. The last interaction I had with Jessica was indeed 6 months ago. She called asking hypothetical questions about trust administration, specifically, what powers a trustee might have in various scenarios. I thought she was trying to educate herself about her responsibilities, which seemed commendable. Harold looked up from the documents, his eyes sharp behind his bifocals. "George, if Jessica is claiming I prepared documentation for a property sale that I know nothing about, there are several disturbing possibilities we need to consider. Such as, she may have forged your signature on sale documents. She may have misrepresented her authority to the buyer or the title company. She may have created fraudulent paperwork claiming my involvement." Harold's voice grew more grave with each possibility. Any of these scenarios would constitute serious criminal activity. Criminal activity. The words hit me like cold water, forcing me to confront the reality that my daughter might not just be selfish or irresponsible. She might be an actual criminal, someone who'd crossed the line from poor judgment into deliberate fraud. Harold pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Susan? It's Harold Whitman. I need you to check on a real estate closing scheduled for today at 2 o'clock. He provided the property address and waited, his face growing increasingly stern as he listened to the response. "I see. And who prepared the seller's documentation?" "I see. Thank you, Susan." He hung up and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd just confirmed his worst suspicions. "George, the closing is indeed scheduled for this afternoon. The seller's documents were prepared by Mark's real estate attorney, not by this office. But more troubling, the signature on the sales contract appears to be yours." "Appears to be?" "Susan says it's a very good forgery, if that's what it is. Good enough to pass initial scrutiny from the title company and the buyer's attorney." Harold leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the careful attention of someone trying to assess how much truth his client could handle. "George, we need to consider the possibility that this isn't Jessica's first time forging your signature." The thought had occurred to me during my sleepless night, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that mere suspicion couldn't. "You think there might be other transactions?" "I think we need to find out immediately. I'm going to make some calls, have a forensic accountant review all your financial records, check for any unusual activity or unauthorized transactions." Harold's fingers drummed against his desk in the rhythm of someone already mentally organizing a complex investigation. "And George, I need to ask, do you want to pursue criminal charges against Jessica?" The question hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. Did I want to see my daughter arrested? Did I want to watch her face criminal prosecution for fraud and forgery? Did I want to be responsible for potentially sending the mother of my grandchildren to prison? "I don't know, Harold. I need time to think." "Of course. But George, I need you to understand something. If we don't stop this transaction today, if we allow the closing to proceed with forged documents, you could be seen as complicit in the fraud. Your silence might be interpreted as consent, which could complicate any future legal action." Harold stood and walked to his window, looking out at the parking lot where ordinary people were arriving for what they assumed would be an ordinary day at work, unaware that someone's family was disintegrating 2 floors above their heads. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said without turning around. "If Jessica has been forging your signature, if she's been making unauthorized financial decisions using her position as trustee, then her children might be in legal jeopardy as well. Depending on how this money has been used, Tyler and Emma could be seen as beneficiaries of criminal activity." Tyler and Emma. My grandchildren, ages 17 and 15, probably sitting in their high school classes right now, Worried about typical teenage problems like grades and social drama and college applications, having no idea that their mother's actions might destroy their futures before they'd even begun. Harold, I need to stop this closing. But I need to do it in a way that protects Tyler and Emma. Agreed. But George, stopping this closing is just the beginning. If Jessica has been systematically defrauding you, we need to understand the full scope of what's happened before we can determine how to protect anyone. Harold returned to his desk and pulled out a legal pad, beginning to make notes with the focused intensity of someone building a case. I'm going to contact the title company immediately and inform them that the seller does not authorize this transaction. That will stop today's closing. Then we'll begin a full financial audit to determine what other damage might have been done. And Jessica, that depends on what we find and on what you ultimately decide to do about it. Harold looked up from his notes, his expression carrying the weight of 20 years of friendship alongside professional obligation. George, I've known you and your family for 2 decades. I watched Jessica grow up. I don't want to see her destroy her life any more than you do. But she's made some very serious choices here, and choices have consequences. I left Harold's office with a sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the coffee I'd consumed and everything to do with the knowledge that my family was fracturing in ways I might not be able to repair. Harold had promised to stop the closing, but he'd also made it clear that Jessica's actions might have consequences that extended far beyond the loss of a beach house. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice Eleanor Pemberton waving from her front porch. Eleanor had been our neighbor for 15 years, a retired school principal who'd known Jessica since she was in high school. Martha and I had always appreciated Eleanor's no-nonsense wisdom and her ability to see through to the heart of any situation with the clarity that comes from spending decades managing teenagers and their parents. I pulled into her driveway, suddenly needing to talk to someone who understood both the weight of family responsibility and the complexities of guiding young people who think they know better than their elders. George, you look troubled, Eleanor said, setting down her evening tea and studying my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 40 years reading the emotional states of people trying to hide their problems. Everything all right? I found myself telling her about the beach house, about Jessica's betrayal, about the impossible position I was in between love and justice, between protecting my daughter and protecting myself from her casual cruelty. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her educator's instincts helping her process not just what I was saying, but what I wasn't saying, the deeper currents of disappointment and grief that ran beneath my carefully controlled words. Well, she said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with thousands of difficult family situations over the decades. That girl needs a dose of reality, and it sounds like you're the only one willing to give it to her. I worry I'm being too harsh, I admitted, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me since Harold's office. She's still my daughter, Eleanor. I don't want to destroy our relationship over money. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, but not unkind, the sound of someone who'd heard this same rationalization from countless parents over the years. George Hartwell, I've watched you raise that daughter for 18 years. You were never harsh. If anything, you and Martha were too soft. I've seen what happens to children who never face consequences for their actions. They become adults who expect the world to accommodate their wants instead of learning to accommodate the world's needs. She leaned forward in her rocking chair, fixing me with the same steady gaze that had intimidated generations of students into better behavior. You know what I told my students? Kindness without standards is just enabling. Standards without kindness is just cruelty. But kindness with standards, that's what builds character. Jessica thinks I'm punishing her. Good. She should think that, at least at first. The best lessons feel like punishment until you understand what they're teaching you. Eleanor's eyes, sharp behind her bifocals, held mine steady. George, I've seen thousands of young people over my career. The ones who turned out best weren't the ones who had it easy. They were the ones whose parents loved them enough to demand their best. Even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful. Pain is how we learn that some choices have consequences we don't want to repeat. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of guilt and uncertainty that had been tightening since Jessica's phone call. Eleanor's validation carried special weight. She'd dedicated her life to understanding how people learned and grew, how character was formed through the careful application of consequences and expectations. When had I lost her? When had my loving daughter become someone who could steal from me with such casual disregard? The answer, I suspected, was gradually. Years of small disappointments, of birthdays forgotten, of promised visits that never materialized. Years of me becoming less a father and more a resource to be managed, less a source of wisdom and more an obstacle to be navigated around. But whose fault is that? The question haunted me as I pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later. Did I push too hard when she was young? Not hard enough. Did I fail to stay relevant in her adult life? Or did she simply outgrow her need for a father? Martha would have known. Martha had always understood Jessica's moods, her motivations, her fears with the intuitive wisdom that comes from sharing the same gender and the same deep emotional currents. Even in those difficult teenage years when Jessica seemed determined to reject everything we'd tried to teach her, Martha had maintained an unwavering faith in our daughter's fundamental goodness. She's just finding herself, Martha would say when I worried about Jessica's choices, her friends, her casual dismissal of the values we tried to instill. The values are there, George. Sometimes they just have to be discovered rather than imposed. Well, Martha, I thought grimly as I sat in my car outside the house we'd shared for 30 years, it seems our daughter is going to do some discovering. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor, Patricia Chun, whom I'd worked with since Martha's death. Patricia was brilliant, discreet, and had helped me navigate the complex process of reorganizing our assets after losing my wife. More importantly, she understood the emotional complexities that came with wealth transfer and family dynamics, having spent 15 years helping affluent retirees navigate the treacherous waters between love and money. I need to make some changes to my estate planning, I told her, choosing my words carefully. What kind of changes, Mr. Hartwell? I want to create a new trust structure. Something that will protect my assets and teach my daughter about the value of family loyalty. Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her mental gears turning as she processed the implications of my request. That sounds like there's a story behind it, George. There is. A very disappointing story. We met the next day while Jessica was presumably signing papers to sell my beach house, using my forged signature to transfer property that held 35 years of family memories. Patricia had prepared several options, but one particularly appealed to my sense of justice and my understanding of what Jessica needed to learn. We create what's called an incentive trust, she explained, spreading documents across her conference table with the same precision Harold had used the day before. The beneficiary receives distributions based on meeting certain criteria. In your daughter's case, we could structure it so that she receives income only if she demonstrates specific behaviors or achievements. Patricia paused, studying my expression with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 15 years helping families navigate complex financial and emotional terrain. George, I have to tell you, in all my years as a financial advisor, I've rarely seen someone handle a family crisis with such strategic thinking and emotional intelligence. Most people in your situation either react in anger or avoid the confrontation entirely. What you're proposing requires remarkable discipline. She pulled out a thick folder of case studies, examples of other families who'd faced similar challenges. I've worked with dozens of families where adult children have betrayed their parents' trust. The ones who simply cut their children off usually regret it later. The ones who just forgive and forget usually see the behavior repeated. But what you're suggesting, accountability paired with opportunity for redemption, that's wisdom. Patricia's professional validation meant something to me. She worked exclusively with affluent retirees, helping them navigate the complexities of wealth transfer and family dynamics. Her clients included judges, business owners, and medical professionals, people who understood the value of strategic thinking and long-term planning. Your approach reminds me of something I learned in business school, she continued, her voice taking on the enthusiasm of someone discussing a particularly elegant solution to a complex problem. The most successful organizations don't just punish bad behavior or reward good behavior. They create systems that encourage people to choose good behavior because they understand why it matters. What kind of behaviors? I asked, though I was already beginning to form ideas in my mind. That's entirely up to you. Some parents require beneficiaries to maintain employment, perform community service, or demonstrate financial responsibility. Others base distributions on family involvement, regular visits, participation in family traditions, caring for aging parents. The irony was perfect, so elegant it felt almost like Martha's gentle hand guiding me toward the right solution. Jessica would inherit my wealth, but only if she learned to value the things she'd dismissed: family, tradition, responsibility, respect for the people who'd sacrificed to build the foundation she was so casually spending. I want to structure it so she has to earn every dollar, I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind with perfect clarity. And I want her to understand exactly what she's lost by betraying my trust. Patricia nodded, already making notes with the efficiency of someone who understood both the legal and emotional complexities of what we were discussing. That's definitely possible, but it will take some time to implement properly, and we'll need to coordinate carefully with Harold to ensure everything is legally sound. I have time, I said, thinking of the months of careful planning that lay ahead. And I have patience. Most importantly, I have the absolute certainty that this is what my daughter needs, whether she realizes it or not. Over the next month, I watched Jessica's life from a distance with the careful attention of a scientist observing a subject who doesn't realize they're being studied. She posted pictures on social media of Tyler's new college preparations, funded by the sale of my beach house. Photos of dormitory furniture and textbooks arranged with the kind of casual pride that comes from spending someone else's money. She and Mark took a weekend trip to Charleston, staying at an expensive resort and posting sunset photos from their waterfront balcony. They bought new furniture for their living room, sleek modern pieces that probably cost more than Martha and I had spent on furnishing our entire house. She called me twice during that month. Both conversations were brief and superficial, following the same script we developed over the past few years. She asked about my health with the dutiful concern of a daughter checking off items on a mental to-do list. She mentioned how busy she was with the kids' activities, as if her schedule were somehow more complex than anyone else's. She promised to visit soon, the same promise she'd been making for months without follow-through. Most tellingly, she never mentioned the beach house or asked how I felt about losing it, as if the sale of 35 years of family memories was just another business transaction too minor to warrant discussion. Meanwhile, I was busy with my own preparations. Patricia and I restructured my entire estate over the course of several careful meetings, creating a complex web of trusts and foundations that would protect my assets while teaching Jessica the lessons she'd somehow failed to learn in 45 years of life. Harold prepared new legal documents that removed Jessica as trustee of the family trust and established strict parameters for any future inheritance. Documents written with the kind of legal precision that comes from 40 years of watching families destroy themselves over money. But the most important work I did was personal research. I hired a discreet private investigator to document Jessica's spending patterns and lifestyle, not out of vindictiveness, but out of the kind of careful preparation that had served me well in 40 years of business. I needed to understand exactly how deep her financial problems ran and whether her betrayal was born of genuine desperation or simple greed disguised as necessity. The report that arrived 2 weeks later was illuminating in the way that harsh light illuminates things you'd rather not see clearly. Mark's real estate business was indeed struggling, but not catastrophically. His income had dropped roughly 30% over the past 2 years, still leaving them with a household income that most families would consider comfortable. They lived in a neighborhood they couldn't quite afford, drove cars that required hefty monthly payments, and spent money on luxuries while claiming financial hardship to justify their theft of my property. Jessica's part-time job as a marketing consultant brought in decent income, supplementing Mark's reduced earnings with the kind of work that allowed her to maintain the illusion of professional success while working limited hours. But they consistently overspent their means with the careless entitlement of people who'd never learned to distinguish between wants and needs. Tyler was indeed a good student, but the expensive college they'd chosen was more about status than education. A prestigious private institution that would saddle him with debt for decades while providing no better education than the state university system I'd suggested years ago. Emma's dental work was necessary, but they'd selected the most costly options available, choosing cosmetic perfection over basic oral health with the same twisted priorities that characterized all their financial decisions. They weren't destitute, I realized as I read through the investigators' meticulously documented findings. They were simply living beyond their means with the assumption that other people, specifically me, would solve the problems created by their own poor choices and inflated lifestyle expectations. This knowledge crystallized my resolve with the cold clarity of absolute certainty. Jessica needed to learn the value of money, the importance of family, and the consequences of betrayal. I was going to teach her all three lessons with the kind of systematic thoroughness that had made me successful in business and marriage. But at what cost? The question kept me awake that night, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with Martha for 30 years, listening to the familiar sounds of our old house settling around me like the bones of something slowly dying. What if this pushes her away permanently? What if I'm so focused on being right that I forget to be loving? I could almost hear Martha's voice in the darkness, the way she used to sound when we'd lie awake discussing Jessica's teenage rebellions or her college boyfriend problems. George, honey, are you teaching or are you punishing? The distinction mattered more than I'd initially realized. Punishment was about making someone pay for their mistakes, satisfying the injured party's need for justice and revenge. Teaching was about helping them avoid making those mistakes again, about building character and wisdom that would serve them for the rest of their lives. But how could I be sure which one I was really doing? How could I separate my legitimate desire to help Jessica from my very human need to see her suffer consequences for the pain she'd caused me? I got up at 3 a.m. and walked to Jessica's old room, which Martha had kept exactly as it was when Jessica left for college 18 years ago. Pink walls covered with posters of boy bands and movie stars, stuffed animals arranged on the bed with the careful precision of someone who still believed in the magic of childhood, photos from high school dances and graduation ceremonies capturing a time when Jessica's future seemed limitless and bright. This room held the Jessica I remembered, the girl who used to come to me with scraped knees and broken hearts, trusting me to make everything better with band-aids and terrible jokes, and the absolute conviction that Daddy could fix anything that was wrong with the world. I'm doing this for her, I told myself, touching the frame of a photo from her high school graduation, her face radiant with the kind of hope that only 18-year-olds possess. I'm trying to give her back the values that used to guide her decisions. But another voice, darker and more honest, whispered in the silence, "Are you sure? Or are you doing this because she hurt you, and you want her to hurt too?" I stood in that pink room for an hour, wrestling with my own motives. Love and disappointment, strategy and genuine hurt, the desire to help and the need for vindication. All of it tangled together until I couldn't separate one emotion from another, couldn't distinguish between noble intentions and base revenge. Martha used to say that the hardest part of parenting wasn't knowing what to do. It was living with the uncertainty of whether you were doing the right thing. Even when Jessica was small, we'd lie awake some nights wondering if we were being too strict or too lenient, too involved or too distant, too protective or too permissive. But this was different. This was my adult daughter, and the stakes felt impossibly high. Get it wrong, and I might lose her forever, might become one of those bitter old men who die alone because they chose pride over love. But do nothing, and I'd already lost her, to selfishness, to entitlement, to the belief that family loyalty was negotiable and parental sacrifice was something to be taken for granted rather than honored. The first phase of my plan began on a Thursday morning in October. I called Jessica at her office, timing the call for mid-morning when I knew she'd be between client meetings and theoretically available for conversation. This is it, I thought as I dialed her number with fingers that were steadier than I'd expected them to be. Once I say these words, there's no going back. We'll either save our relationship or destroy it completely. My hands were steadier than expected, maybe because I'd spent so many sleepless nights preparing for this moment, or maybe because part of me was already grieving the easy relationship Jessica and I would never have again. Either way, we were going to have an honest relationship, or we weren't going to have one at all. "Hi, Dad," she said, sounding distracted in the way that had become her default tone when speaking with me, as if our conversations were interruptions to be managed rather than connections to be savored. "I'm just heading into a meeting. Can I call you back?" "This won't take long, sweetheart. I wanted to let you know I'm making some changes to my estate planning." That got her attention with the sudden sharpness of someone who'd just heard something that directly affected their financial future. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "I've decided to establish a charitable foundation. I'm donating most of my assets to causes that Martha and I cared about, veterans organizations, literacy programs, environmental conservation." The kind of legacy work that makes a real difference in the world. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, that technology had failed us at precisely the moment when human connection was most crucial. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm very serious, Jessica. I've realized that material wealth isn't what matters most. Family, community, leaving a positive legacy. These things are more important than money sitting in bank accounts. But what about Tyler's college? What about Emma's future? What about... Her voice rose with the kind of panic that comes from watching your assumptions crumble in real time. I'm sure you and Mark will provide for your children's needs, I said with the calm reasonableness of someone who'd spent weeks preparing for this exact conversation. You've demonstrated excellent financial judgment recently. Another pause, shorter this time, but heavy with calculation. Dad, can we talk about this in person? Maybe this weekend? I think there might be some misunderstandings we need to clear up. I'd love that, Jessica. It's been too long since we've had a real conversation. She came that Saturday afternoon, arriving with a strained smile and a store-bought pie. The kind of gesture that acknowledged the formality of the occasion while requiring minimal effort or personal investment. We sat in the living room where she'd played as a child, surrounded by photos of our family's happier times, the visual evidence of decades when we'd actually enjoyed each other's company. Dad, I'm worried about these changes you're making, she began, her voice carrying the careful concern of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. After Mom died, you were so depressed, and now you're making major financial decisions without consulting anyone. Maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or a financial advisor, or you think I'm not competent to manage my own affairs? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the insult implicit in her suggestion. No, that's not what I meant, she said quickly, backpedaling with the skill of someone who'd learned to navigate difficult conversations through careful word choice. I just think grief can affect judgment, and these kinds of decisions shouldn't be made in isolation. Maybe we should involve Harold, get his professional opinion. Jessica, my judgment is fine. In fact, it's clearer than it's been in years. She tried a different approach, switching tactics with the fluidity of someone who'd learned to manipulate conversations to achieve desired outcomes. What about the beach house? You seemed upset about the sale at first, but I thought you'd realized it was the right decision. We got such a good price, and the money is already helping Tyler and Emma. $450,000, I said, letting the number hang in the air between us like an accusation. Right? That's almost double what you and Mom paid for it. It's been a fantastic investment. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared with the meticulous care of someone building a legal case. Real estate comparables, market analyses, recent sales data for beachfront properties in the area, documentation that painted a very different picture than the one Jessica had been selling. Similar properties sold for between $650 and $720 this year, I said, sliding the papers across the coffee table with the deliberate precision of someone presenting evidence in court. You and Mark accepted the first low offer you received because you were desperate for quick cash. She glanced at the documents, and I watched the blood drain from her face as the reality of her mistake became undeniable. Mark said the market was soft. His buyer was paying cash, no financing contingencies, quick closing. Her voice trailed off as she realized how weak her justifications sounded in the face of hard data. His buyer was Mark's golf buddy who flips beach properties. I continued, my voice growing harder with each word. I called the county records office. The house sold again 3 weeks later for $680,000. The silence in the room was profound, heavy with the weight of revelations that couldn't be taken back or rationalized away. You cost our family over $200,000 through impatience and poor judgment. I continued, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. Money that belonged to me, that you had no right to spend, that you used to fund your lifestyle while claiming financial necessity. Look at her face, I thought, watching Jessica's expression crumble as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. Look what you're doing to your own daughter. For a moment, I wavered. This was Jessica, my little girl, the child who used to fall asleep in my lap during bedtime stories, who used to believe I could solve any problem and fix any hurt. The teenager who'd come to me for advice about boys and colleges and her future dreams, back when she still believed her father might know something worth learning. How had we gotten to this place where I was laying out evidence of her failures like a prosecutor building a case against a criminal? Because someone has to, I answered myself with the grim resolution of a man who'd run out of easier options. Because no one else loves her enough to tell her the truth about what she's become. Martha would be disappointed in both of us right now, I realized with uncomfortable clarity. In Jessica for her selfishness, but also in me for the satisfaction I'm taking in watching her squirm. But Martha wasn't here to moderate between us, wasn't here to find the gentler path or the more forgiving approach. It was just me and the daughter who'd sold my memories to fund her lifestyle, and one of us had to be strong enough to demand better. Dad, please, let me make this right. You can't make it right, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her desperate promises. The house is gone. Your mother's sanctuary, our family's gathering place, 35 years of memories. All sold so you could take a weekend trip to Charleston. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing now with the kind of ugly crying that comes from genuine remorse mixed with terror about the future. I didn't know it meant so much to you. You didn't ask. You didn't consider anyone but yourself and your immediate wants. I waited until her crying subsided, then handed her a tissue box, the same gesture I'd made countless times when she was small, though now it carried the weight of adult consequences rather than childhood comfort. However, I continued, my voice softening slightly as I moved toward the heart of my plan. I believe people can learn and change. I believe in redemption and second chances. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove that you understand what you've done and that you're committed to becoming the daughter I raised you to be. She looked up hopefully, mascara streaked across her cheeks, clinging to the possibility of salvation with the desperation of someone who'd just realized how close they'd come to losing everything that mattered. What kind of opportunity? I pulled out the final folder, the one that had taken Harold and Patricia weeks to prepare. Legal documents, complex trust structures, and inheritance terms that would govern the rest of Jessica's life. Assuming she was brave enough to accept the challenge I was about to present. You have 6 months to demonstrate that you understand the value of family, hard work, and financial responsibility. If you succeed, you'll inherit my estate as originally planned. If you fail, everything goes to charity. What do I have to do? I handed her a single-page summary of requirements, watching her face as she read through them with growing comprehension of what I was asking. She read it twice, her expression shifting from hope to confusion to something approaching panic. Dad, this is impossible. Nothing on that list is impossible. Everything on that list is something you should have been doing all along. The requirements were specific and measurable, designed with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years in management and understood the difference between goals and wishful thinking. Jessica had to visit me twice a week for dinner and conversation. Real conversation, not the superficial check-ins that had become our standard interaction. She had to take over the maintenance of Martha's garden, learning to care for the roses and vegetables my wife had lovingly tended for 30 years. She had to volunteer 20 hours per month at the Veterans Center where I'd been donating time since retirement. She had to get her family's finances in order, creating and sticking to a budget, paying down debt, living within their means instead of constantly reaching for lifestyle upgrades they couldn't afford. She had to research and present a plan for Tyler to attend a state university instead of the expensive private college they'd chosen. She had to take a part-time job to supplement her consulting income. Most importantly, she had to write letters to everyone affected by the sale of the beach house, family members who'd spent summers there, friends who'd been guests, even neighbors who'd watched over the property. She had to acknowledge her mistake and ask for their forgiveness, owning the full scope of what she'd destroyed. This is punishment, she said quietly, her voice carrying the sullen tone of someone who'd been hoping for easier terms. This is education, and it's your choice. I met her eyes directly, letting her see the absolute resolve in my expression. You can complete these requirements and inherit approximately $3 million, or you can continue your current lifestyle and inherit nothing. Her eyes widened with shock that was almost comical in its intensity. $3 million. You thought the beach house was my only asset, I said, allowing myself a small smile at her obvious surprise. Jessica, your mother and I saved and invested for 50 years. We lived below our means, made careful financial decisions, and built real wealth. Wealth that I intended to pass on to you and your children. But you said you were donating everything to charity. I said I was considering it. The final decision depends on you. She stared at the list again, and I could see her mind working, calculating the costs and benefits, the effort required versus the potential reward. This was the moment of truth. Would she choose the hard path of genuine change, or would she walk away from both the money and our relationship? What if I don't? What if I can't do all of this? Then you'll learn to live on what you and Mark can earn honestly, I said with the calm certainty of someone who'd thought through every possible outcome. Tyler will attend community college for his first 2 years and then transfer to a state university. Emma will get standard dental care instead of cosmetic perfection. You'll downsize your house, sell your luxury cars, and discover the satisfaction of living within your means. And if I do complete the requirements, then you'll inherit everything. But more importantly, you'll understand why you deserve to inherit it. You'll know the value of family loyalty, hard work, and financial responsibility. You'll be the kind of woman your mother would be proud of. Jessica sat quietly for several minutes, processing everything I told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain, carrying echoes of the little girl she'd once been. She sounds like she did when she was 7 and had to confess to breaking Martha's favorite vase, I thought. Small and scared and hoping that Daddy could fix everything. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Then, I had fixed it. Not the vase, which was irreplaceable, but Jessica's guilt and fear. I'd helped her clean up the pieces, explained that accidents happen, showed her how to be more careful in the future. Most importantly, I'd made sure she understood that my love wasn't conditional on her being perfect. Was I sending that same message now? Or was I teaching her that love came with strings attached, that family loyalty was transactional, that mistakes could cost her everything she held dear? Stop second-guessing yourself, I commanded silently. This isn't about a broken vase. This is about a broken relationship, and she's the one who broke it. But the doubt lingered, a whisper of uncertainty that would follow me through the months ahead. Why are you doing this, Dad? Why not just cut me off completely? Because I love you, I said, the words carrying more weight than any legal document. Because despite what you've done, you're still my daughter. Because your mother would want me to give you a chance to redeem yourself. She nodded slowly, tears still wet on her cheeks. When do I start? Right now? The garden needs to be prepared for winter. Martha's roses need to be pruned and covered. Jessica hadn't done manual labor since her teenage years when I'd made her mow the lawn to earn spending money. She'd complained bitterly then, but she'd done the work. Now, watching her struggle with pruning shears and fertilizer, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The first day was brutal. Jessica spent 3 hours trying to prune Martha's rose bushes, following the detailed instructions I'd written out for her. By the end, her hands were blistered, her back ached, and she'd managed to properly trim only 2 of the dozen bushes that needed attention. Dad, she said, collapsing into one of the patio chairs, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool October air. I don't understand how Mom made this look so easy. Your mother spent 30 years learning to do this work, I replied, feeling a familiar pang of loss as I remembered Martha's gentle hands coaxing beauty from the soil. She made mistakes, learned from them, developed the skill over time. She didn't expect to master it in one afternoon. Jessica stared at the pruning shears in her hands, her palms red and tender despite the gloves I'd provided. I remember being about 10 years old, begging Mom to let me help with the roses. She said I wasn't ready, that I needed to learn with easier plants first. I got so angry. I thought she was being mean, keeping the fun work for herself. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see something shifting in her expression, a dawning recognition that transformed her face from petulant confusion to something approaching understanding. She wasn't being mean, was she? She was protecting the roses from my inexperience. Just like. Jessica looked up at me, her eyes bright with tears that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Just like you tried to protect me from making financial mistakes, and I thought you were being controlling. It was the first glimmer of real understanding I'd seen from her, the first crack in the wall of entitlement and rationalization she'd built around her choices. The second day wasn't much better physically, but Jessica's attitude had changed dramatically. Instead of complaining about the difficulty, she asked questions. How deep should she dig around the base of each bush? When was the best time to apply fertilizer? What signs should she watch for to know if the plants were thriving or struggling? Dad, I've been thinking about something, she said during a water break, wiping dirt from her forehead with the back of her gardening glove. When I was learning to drive, you made me practice in empty parking lots for weeks before you'd let me try real roads. I thought you were being overly cautious. All my friends' parents let them start on regular streets right away." She paused, looking down at the roses she was learning to tend with something that might have been respect. "But I was the only one of my friends who didn't have an accident in their first year of driving. You weren't being overly cautious. You were teaching me that some skills require gradual development. That rushing into something before you're ready usually leads to mistakes you could have avoided." Jessica looked directly at me, her gaze steady and serious. "I should have listened to you about the beach house. I should have asked for your guidance instead of assuming I knew better." By the third week, Jessica's hands had developed calluses, and her technique had improved dramatically. More importantly, her perspective was changing in ways I hadn't anticipated. "You know what I realized yesterday?" she said, carefully removing diseased branches from Martha's prized climbing rose. "When you made me mow the lawn as a teenager, I thought you were punishing me for asking for spending money. But you weren't punishing me. You were teaching me that money comes from work, that nothing valuable is free." She paused, studying a branch to determine the best place to make her cut, her movements growing more confident with each passing day. "I spent 20 years thinking your lessons were punishments. But they weren't punishments. They were preparations. You were trying to prepare me for a world where things have to be earned, where shortcuts have consequences, where respect comes from demonstrating competence. I should have listened to you," she added quietly, her voice carrying the weight of genuine regret. "I'm just sorry it took me so long to understand." The next 6 months were the most challenging period of Jessica's adult life and the most rewarding of mine. I watched from a careful distance as my daughter transformed from someone who expected the world to accommodate her wants into someone who understood that respect and security come from meeting the world's demands with competence and grace. The letter writing requirement proved particularly transformative. The first letter to Martha's sister Ruth took Jessica 3 days to write. She brought me draft after draft, asking for guidance on tone and content with the humility of someone who'd finally recognized the scope of her mistake. "Dad, I don't know how to apologize for something this big," she said, showing me her 4th attempt. "How do you ask forgiveness for destroying something that can never be replaced? What are you trying to accomplish with the letter?" I asked. "I want Ruth to forgive me. I want her to not hate me." "Those are things you want to get from Ruth. What do you want to give to her?" Jessica stared at the letter, then slowly crumpled it up with the decisive gesture of someone who just understood the fundamental difference between self-serving apologies and genuine accountability. "I want to give her an acknowledgement that I understood what I destroyed. I want her to know that you were trying to protect those memories, and I was too selfish to listen." The letter she eventually sent was raw and honest, taking full responsibility without making excuses or asking for anything in return. Most of the responses were gracious, but some were pointed. Ruth didn't mince words. "I never thought I'd see the day when you'd sell your parents' memories for spending money." But Ruth's follow-up letter surprised Jessica. "Your apology showed me genuine remorse and understanding of what was lost. While I'm still heartbroken about the beach house, I'm proud of the woman you're becoming. Your mother would want you to learn from this experience and grow stronger." Jessica brought Ruth's second letter to dinner, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, she forgave me. How did you know that taking responsibility would be more important than trying to minimize my mistake?" The volunteer work at the Veterans Center proved equally transformative. One afternoon, I found Jessica deep in conversation with Frank Morrison, an 82-year-old Marine veteran notorious for his gruff demeanor. "Your daughter's got backbone, George," Frank said when he noticed me. "First volunteer in 20 years who didn't flinch when I told her she was doing things wrong. She asked me why we do things a certain way instead of just complaining that it's hard. Shows respect for the system," Frank continued. "Your Jessica's one of the ones figuring it out. You did something right, making her work for what she wants instead of just handing it to her." Jessica also met Dorothy Martinez, an 86-year-old Vietnam nurse who became her mentor in the deeper lessons of service and sacrifice. Dorothy said something that hit me hard. Jessica told me one evening. She said that young people today think happiness comes from getting what they want, but real happiness comes from wanting what you have. Dorothy also told me, "Your father raised you right, honey. You just forgot for a while. But the values are still there. I can see them coming back." "I think Mom would be proud of me now," Jessica said quietly. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living according to values that matter. By March, Jessica had lost 15 pounds from the physical work, but she looked healthier and more confident than she had in years. She developed calluses from gardening and carried herself with a dignity I hadn't seen since her college years. The twice-weekly dinners became the highlight of my week. We talked about everything: Martha's memory, Jessica's childhood, the lessons she was learning. For the first time since her marriage, I felt like I had my daughter back. "Dad, I had coffee with my friend Sarah last week," Jessica said one evening. She was complaining about her mother-in-law's interference in spending decisions. I found myself defending the older generation. I told her that maybe her mother-in-law wasn't interfering. Maybe she was sharing wisdom earned through decades of experience. I said, maybe instead of resenting her advice, you should ask her to teach you. Jessica smiled ruefully. Sarah looked at me like I'd grown a second head. She said, "That doesn't sound like the Jessica I know." And I realized she was right. The Jessica you knew was foolish. She thought respect for elders was old-fashioned, but respect for elders is how wisdom gets passed down. In May, Jessica organized a surprise barbecue featuring all the people who'd been important in our lives. Ruth came from Virginia. Bob and Helen drove from Raleigh. Neighbors, friends from church, volunteers from the Veterans Center, everyone gathered to celebrate what Jessica called Dad's wisdom and patience. Eleanor Pemberton took Jessica aside during the party. "Jessica, honey, I owe you an apology. When your father first told me what was happening, I thought you might be beyond help. But watching you these past months, it's been remarkable. You know what I told the ladies at Bridge Club?" I said, "George Hartwell accomplished something most parents only dream of. He found a way to teach adult values to an adult child." Dr. Williams, my physician, pulled me aside. "George, what you've accomplished with Jessica is extraordinary. Most parents either enable the bad behavior or give up entirely. But you found a third option. You held Jessica accountable while still leaving room for redemption." Frank Morrison approached us. "You know what she told me last week?" She said, "Frank, I used to think my father was old-fashioned. I thought his values were outdated. But I've learned that values aren't old-fashioned. They're timeless." Dorothy Martinez smiled broadly. Jessica sat that girl down and gave her what we used to call a come-to-Jesus talk. She said, "My father didn't raise me right just so I could ignore everything he taught me when I became an adult. He raised me right so I would know how to live well for my entire life." Jessica began asking me specific questions. "How did you and Mom decide when to buy the house? How do you know when to be firm with children versus flexible?" Each question showed me that Jessica was finally ready to learn from the experience I'd been trying to share with her for years. "Dad, I need to tell you something important," Jessica said one evening. "I've been talking to other parents about the lessons I'm learning from you. Do you know what most of them tell me? They tell me they wish they had a parent who cared enough to teach them these things." Jessica's voice grew thick with emotion. "I realize now that everything you're putting me through isn't punishment. It's the most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. You're giving me the tools I need to live well. I should have listened to you years ago. You were trying to protect me from exactly the kind of mess I created. Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad. Thank you for loving me enough to risk our relationship in order to save me from myself." As the 6-month deadline approached, I called Harold and Patricia to finalize the inheritance documents. Jessica had not only met every requirement, but exceeded them in ways that demonstrated genuine transformation. On a warm evening in late May, I asked Jessica to come for dinner to discuss her inheritance. She arrived with a small wrapped package. "Dad, before you tell me about the inheritance, I need to give you something." Inside was a framed photograph, Martha and me sitting on the deck of the beach house, watching a sunset. Our 40th wedding anniversary. I drove down to the beach house last weekend. The new owners invited me to walk through the property. I told them about selling the house, about not understanding what I was giving up. The woman said, "Some places hold more than memories. They hold pieces of our souls." I sat on that deck and cried for an hour. I cried for Mom, for the summers I'd never see there again, for the grandchildren who'll never build sandcastles on that beach. But mostly, I cried for disappointing you so badly. She took my hand, her fingers rough now from months of honest work. "Dad, I don't need the inheritance. I don't deserve it, and more importantly, I don't need it anymore. Mark and I are fine. We're better than fine. We're happy and secure and living according to our values. That's worth more than any amount of money. Let me finish. These 6 months have been the most important of my adult life. You didn't just teach me about money and responsibility. You taught me about love. Real love, the kind that sees someone's flaws and helps them become better. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden she'd brought back to life. You were right all along, Dad. About everything. About family loyalty, about living within our means, about finding joy in simple things, about putting relationships before possessions and values before convenience. She turned back to me, and in her face I saw a woman who had finally learned to value what truly mattered. I spent years thinking your guidance was outdated, that your values were old-fashioned. But they weren't old-fashioned, they were timeless. I need to learn from your experience, Dad. I should have listened to you years ago. You were trying to protect me from exactly the kind of mess I created. How did you know this would happen? I'm sorry I forgot those lessons. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I sold Mom's sanctuary for money. I didn't need to solve problems I created myself. Will you forgive me? I forgave you months ago, sweetheart. The question is whether you can forgive yourself and commit to being the woman your mother and I raised you to be. I can. I will. I promise. That evening, I gave Jessica 2 envelopes. The first contained the inheritance documents. She would receive the full estate as originally planned, but now she understood what it meant. The second envelope contained the deed to a small cottage I'd purchased. It's not the same as the beach house, I said. It's smaller, simpler, not as close to the ocean. But it's a place where our family can gather, where Tyler and Emma can bring their own children someday, where we can create new memories while honoring the old ones. Jessica stared at the deed with wonder. When did you buy this? Last month, after I realized you were going to succeed. I used part of the money from my investment accounts. Money you never knew existed. But the inheritance, you said I had to choose between completing the requirements and losing everything. I said the final decision depended on you. It did. If you'd failed the test, I would have donated my assets to charity. But you didn't fail, Jessica. You succeeded beyond my greatest hopes. She was crying again, but these were tears of joy. Dad, I love you so much. Thank you for not giving up on me. Your mother always said that love without expectations is just sentiment. Real love demands the best from people, even when it's difficult. As Jessica hugged me goodbye that night, I felt Martha's presence more strongly than at any time since her death. Jessica had learned her last lesson, but more importantly, she'd become her own teacher. She would pass these values on to Tyler and Emma, creating their own legacy of family loyalty, financial responsibility, and moral strength. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let their child fail, struggle, and find their own way back to the values that matter. It's painful and risky, but it's the only way real wisdom is ever learned. Jessica learned that lesson at 45, which was better than never learning it at all. And I learned something too. That love patient enough to demand transformation is love powerful enough to achieve it. 3 months later, Jessica called me on a Thursday evening, just as I was settling into my routine with chamomile tea and a crossword puzzle. Dad, I wanted you to know, Tyler got a scholarship to cover half his tuition at state. He's been working part-time at the Veterans Center, and Dorothy Martinez wrote his recommendation letter. Your mother would be so proud. She'd be proud of all of us. Dad, thank you for loving me enough to save me from myself. And in that moment, I knew that some inheritances can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in wisdom passed down, values restored, and love that refuses to give up on the people who matter most. The beach house was gone, but the family legacy was stronger than ever. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by subscribing to my channel so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. See you in the next video. With love and respect.